Thank you guys for being here today. I'm happy to be here on this issue. Wish it was not preceded by the terrible tragedy that has caused us to move forward on it. But we've been talking for some time about the extreme risk protection orders, and today we're here to unveil that bill. As you can see, is bipartisan. The state of Florida passed one a few weeks ago, and in that time there's been at least 3 documented attempts in which it's either in the process of being used or has been used. The Orlando Sentinel reported yesterday, late last night, that it had been used on someone at the University of Central Florida who admitted to police that he was one bad incident in his life away from taking the lives of someone in a mass shooting. A few days earlier, we had another report in one of the Florida press outlets that someone in Broward or Palm Beach County, I forget which one of the 2 counties, it had been used to remove firearms from someone who was dangerous. And as we saw a few days ago, the court has applied for one in the case of the brother of the shooter in Parkland. And these extreme risk protection orders are, in my view, one of the most effective things that states can do to address it. In a significant majority of these cases involving mass shootings, the shooter has told people way ahead of time of what they intend to do. The signs are there months and sometimes years in advance. That includes the shooter in Parkland. This is someone that as early as 2016 authorities were concerned about. There had been a recommendation that he be Baker Acted. These tools now give authorities the ability to go in and take away their guns with due process, but also to prevent them from buying others that could put people's lives in danger. And so the goal of this legislation is to create an incentive for the rest of the states to do what Florida and 5 other states have already done, and that is put in place strong extreme protection risk orders so that law enforcement and family members have a tool that they can use to go to court, convince a judge that this person is dangerous, and take away their guns before they can take away anyone's lives.
So, if there is a red flag, this legislation will give the federal incentives to the states to enact laws like our state of Florida, that if a red flag goes up, get the person involved in front of a judge so that the judge can decide, are they a risk if they have possession of a gun. It's telling. The Orlando Sentinel headline is, "Orlando man who police say wanted to commit mass shooting barred from having weapons under the new law." That's the state law. This federal legislation is going to give the incentive for the federal government to help the other states to want to enact similar laws.
Well, first, let me commend Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson for bringing us together with their leadership on this very important issue. This bill will help prevent tragedies like mass shootings and suicides. It empowers, as Marco and Bill have said, family members and law enforcement to keep guns away from people who have exhibited serious, documented signs of danger to themselves or others. This bill empowers people and states, and frankly, the states are the ones leading on this issue. And red and blue states, and both Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio indicated Florida has taken a step forward. They have stepped up and enacted so-called red flag laws. And on a bipartisan basis, we hope that happens all across the country, in states like Florida and also in my home state of Rhode Island. We have recognized, particularly after the horrific event at Parkland, that all of these shooters have indicated some warning signs before, repeated 9/11 calls or disturbing social media posts. There's enough warning that if there is a way to, through due process, prevent them from having access to a weapon, we can save lives. And that's what we're about. It helps us to move forward in this important respect. In my state, let me recognize my governor, Governor Raimondo, Gino Raimondo, who has taken leadership along with our police chiefs. Our police chiefs are the ones who are coming forward in Rhode Island and asking for this authority under due process to be able to reach out and stop someone with dangerous tendencies who might use a weapon. and horrendous crimes we've seen. We have to do much, much more. But we're beginning today, and let me commend once again Senators Nelson and Senator Rubio for their efforts. We don't want to see another Stoneman Douglas High School, another Great Mills High School, a Marshall County High School, Columbine, Sandy Hook, Santana High School, Red Lake High School, West Nickel Mine School, Virginia Tech, Northern Illinois, Santa Monica College, UC Santa Barbara, Marysville, Pilchuck High School, North Park Elementary, and unfortunately on and on. It must stop. Thank you.
For Senators Rubio and Nelson, when you go home to Florida during this upcoming recess and you talk to constituents, what will you tell them Congress did to change gun laws in the wake of the Parkland shooting?
Well, if you want me to take that first, I would say it's more than just about gun laws. What did we do to prevent gun violence? And I would say that while it's not controversial, we have a habit in this town that something's not controversial. We saw it in the human trafficking bill, and we're seeing it now. If it's not controversial, we think it's modest or not meaningful. I understand that some people want to do more than has already been done, but today we will pass the Stop School Violence Act in addition to significant increases in the omnibus for all sorts of prevention programs, for school safety funding and the like. The Stop School Violence Act that has broad bipartisan support that Senator Hatch has offered is going to ultimately reach almost $1 billion over the next decade in helping schools set up risk assessment systems where they can identify people in a systemic way, the way they already do in Los Angeles, the way they already do in Utah, the way they did in an ad hoc way in Central Florida. We know that about a year and a half ago in Titusville, there was a school shooter, and had it not, a potential school shooter, and had it not been for a teacher whose husband had a friend in law enforcement who was not satisfied with the school district's response and called that friend and had them act on it, we could have had a school shooting in Florida at the same scale as Parkland over a year before Parkland. And so identifying potential shooters and stopping them before they take action is something that Stop School Violence will help us do. And the second thing is we are building bipartisan, what we hope will become bipartisan momentum behind passing a law that encourages the rest of the country to have extreme risk protection and violence prevention acts like the ones that Florida has already done. And each of these build on momentum for the next. And so I think we would point to those two things and say progress is being made. There's a lot more to be done, but these are meaningful things.
So when we pass the omnibus tonight or tomorrow, there are three things in it. Marco mentioned the Stop School Violence Act. There's also the Fix NICS Act. And then there is a fix to the long-time law that the CDC could not do research on how guns and the possession of guns increases the violence and therefore the health. We have tried, that's actually an unintended consequence of this amendment that had been passed years ago. But finally, it's addressed. Now, so there are three things. From my perspective, it's a step forward, albeit a small step, ultimately to what needs to be done. And, of course, you know my position on that. It's got to be universal background checks in the acquisition of a gun, as well as we've got to get the assault rifles and those big clips that carry 30 rounds to get them off the streets. But you know the politics. So you got to start somewhere. And so this is the first step at the federal level. I'll give you just one example. When Gabby Giffords was shot, and you know a federal judge was killed in that same, there were others that were injured. The fella had a clip with 10. When he was reloading with the second clip is when he was tackled and stopped. If that had been a clip of 30, you can imagine how much more damage that he would have done. But of course, because of the politics, that's going to be an issue for another day. I want you to know I appreciate very much my colleague having the fortitude and the guts under enormous pressure to step up and to step out in getting this first step. And just to conclude by saying on the Stop Violence Act, it again, it's federal incentives, very similar to what we're offering in this legislation, but this will be law, and listen to what it does. It authorizes for improving building infrastructure, developing anonymous reporting systems on school violence threats, and create crisis intervention teams. That's going to become law as soon as we pass it here in the Senate and it goes down to the White House for signature.
Senator Rubio.
Can I just add one thing to that point, because I don't want us to be lost, and Jack's been here a long time, so he'll know. Understand what's happening. Yesterday is 5 weeks since Parkland. If you're from Florida, in the 5 weeks since Parkland, the state legislature has passed pretty sweeping reforms that didn't go as far as some people wanted, but did some significant things that are already paying dividends. The United States Congress, a place where it takes 1,000 years to move on anything, has now moved on the Dickey Amendment, has now moved on Stop School Violence, and hopefully has moved on Fix NICS. There's more to be done, but there's a process here about momentum, too. Legislative momentum is real. And I would say to you that the one thing that I would point to that's been very helpful in the work up here has been when those 17 families put their name to these documents and say, we want to support this and we want you to support that. That's had a tremendous impact on legislative leadership in pushing these things forward. Today alone, I've met with 2 of those parents that with the work they're doing has really been helpful in terms of breaking through ice and getting progress on things.
Just a quick point. We don't have to necessarily go home. There's several 100,000 young people coming here. And one of the reasons we're moving so quickly, Mark, was because of the incredible young people and Bill and Parkland who've shown us the way. So they should not be forgotten. They should be thanked.
From everywhere, from all over the country. Yeah?
Senator Rubio, can you just talk more about that second step, which clearly is a much harder lift? Where do you see your party on some of the issues you've talked about, and is there any realistic chance for anything else being...
So the way I viewed this is I ranked these things in order of hierarchy. I wanted to make sure people had results. My biggest fear is that we would go home, that there would be a 5 weeks after Parkland, there would be a recess, and nothing would have happened. And it would just be demoralizing for the community in Parkland and others that had insisted on action. So I looked at it and said, what are the things that I think have a realistic chance of passing between now and that Easter recess? And Stop School Violence was clearly one of them, along with what Senator Nelson's been working on, others like the Dickey Amendment and Fix NICS. The second is, what is the thing that we can move in during the next cycle that we think we can get some real momentum behind? And I think these restraining orders are it, because you're starting to see them work. Every time that one of these works, we want to highlight it so that people can see these things they're not novelties, they actually work. I think the third phase involves some of the ones that are a little heavier lifts. I don't know what the vote count is on the age limit. I don't know what the vote count is on the magazine clip, but obviously those are a little harder and to get the votes there, and those will take a little bit more time to develop. So that's the order that I've at least internally ranked them in terms of, getting to those topics. I thought these Stop School Violence was something we could get done before the recess. It looks like it's going to happen, along with the Dickey Amendment repeal, along with Fix NICS. The second step, in my view, would be gun violence restraining orders, because we're starting to get results from the one in Florida and across the country. Then the harder issues that I'm supportive of are the age limit one and the magazines, and those are just going to take a little bit more time. And to be fair on the magazine one, it's a new issue for me. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about it. What's the right number? What's the right regulation? How would that process work? But that's the order that I see it in my mind. Others may disagree. But.
So, I want to ask you about what is going to end up in the omnibus and also what is not. The House Republican supported concealed carry reciprocity bill is not going to make it in, and it was a call that the President as well as other Republicans made, because otherwise you'd have Democratic opposition in the Senate and all of that. But I think the point is, it's been a long time since we've seen movement on gun safety without, well, first of all, in general, but also without corresponding movement toward more sort of gun rights legislation. have you seen a change in the, does this mean there's a change in the politics in how gun legislation is being addressed here? Are Republicans in general more flexible on gun safety legislation and less worried about the impact on gun rights? I mean, is that...
No, I would say that what's changed is the willingness of people to come back and say, you know, why don't we work on the things that we agree on, even as we continue to debate on the issues that we don't. Let's not, let's not avoid dealing and getting done the things that we agree with just because there's some other issues that we care about that we don't agree with. So perhaps a couple of years ago, some of these things that we're talking about would have been held hostage until we did it all. And I think now what you're seeing is a willingness on both sides of the aisle to check off the things that we agree on and get those out of the way, knowing full well that there are some other issues involving gun regulations where there is a divide here. But that debate has been going on and will continue no matter how it turns out. There's groups on both sides of those issues that will continue to talk about that. But there are things we agree on. We shouldn't avoid doing the things that we need to do just because there are things that we don't yet agree upon. And I think that's been a change from what I've seen in the past. And I think a big role has been the students and the families. I got to tell you, every time I show up and Bill shows up with that letter signed by the 17 families who disagree themselves on some of the gun control elements of it, but they're saying we want fixed NICS, we want stop school violence, we want the Florida bill. It's impactful. It's impactful. And that's been a big part of it as well. Not to say that the families in the previous shootings were not effective, because in fairness, Stop School Violence was an initiative of Sandy Hook Promise. They've been working on this for a long time. So I think that's the difference I've noticed, is the willingness of people to work on things that they agree on, even though they know that there are things that we don't agree on. And that's not always been the case. And perhaps Parkland has changed that practice in some way.
Remember that the one issue that you mentioned, left out, concealed carry. Oh, there were many things that were left out. And recall also that the final decisions were made by the Big Four. Take, for example, one thing that was left out that Democrats wanted was DACA, the Dreamers. So when you talk about coming to agreement, there are a lot of things that when you're at the last minute trying to fund the U.S. government, you can't get every item that a particular person or side wants. But what has turned out is exactly what Marco has suggested. Now, if we can get this red flag bill passed, then that's another step. And then I want us to get to these extended clips because it is so obvious. We ought to be able to convince our colleagues that it just doesn't make sense to go around. I'm a hunter. There are game that you hunt that you can only have so many bullets or shells in your gun. I mean, why should we have 30 rounds in a clip?
Just to take off on that one more point, because it touches on we have, now I'm going to go off after you guys just a little bit, our political coverage in America, primarily on cable television, has become a red versus blue model. That's just what it is. Every TV show is about, you line up a guest on the right, line up on the left, and let them fight with each other. And that obviously, perhaps that's a symptom of our politics or a contributor to it. But what it's created is a perception that this is a zero-sum game, that somehow in this republic, I can get everything I want and Bill Nelson can get nothing he wants, that somehow we can achieve total victory. That's very rare because we need his vote and they need our vote, especially in the Senate. And so what it does is it forces you to kind of figure out, that's the way our system was designed. And so if I can get 70% of what I want or 50% of what I want or 60% of what I want, we have to take that as a win. It's okay to kick a field goal on fourth down if you're near the goal line. They don't always have to be touchdowns. You're putting points on the board. And that doesn't mean that I don't pursue my principles, and if I have a chance to get more than I thought I could, we wouldn't try to do it. But we have to find a way to figure out how to solve problems in a country that's increasingly diverse, not just ethnically or racially, geographically, but ideologically. okay? The people in San Francisco, the majority of people in San Francisco, the majority of the people in the panhandle of Florida or in Mississippi somewhere have very different views on politics. But somehow we got to share a country. And I think that's hopefully what we can not continue to move towards on finding a way forward, whether it's guns or any of the other issues confronting our country.
What do you think about the tone of the messages from the March for Our Lives organizers? Do you think that their sort of "you're with us or against us" message will influence their ability to impact policy?
I don't know.
They are split in their...
Yeah, I would imagine that even within people that are here to march, there's differences of opinion on a variety of specific topics. I think if it's a march calling for action on the issue of violence in schools and beyond in our society, it's a good thing, because it doesn't allow a society that so quickly pivots to another news item to walk away from this one. Obviously, I've shared with you my personal view, and that is that one of the things that have made the parents very effective, and some of the students that have come up here as well, is their willingness to meet with everybody and try to find common ground. That sounds cliche-ish, but it's the only way to get things done. I mean, that's just the system we have. We got to pass something in the House with a supermajority. In the Senate, we got to pass something in the House with a majority. The president has to be willing to sign it. You got to balance a lot of that. And so I think that the parents, the 17 families that have been involved in this, have been very successful because of their willingness to work with everyone, even if they don't agree with you on everything. So I think the march and the events surrounding it can be very effective in terms of not allowing the attention to be diverted from this issue onto something else until the next shooting. But in terms of getting things passed, the only way we're going to get things passed here that makes things better, not perfect, but better, is if people who disagree on things are able to work together on the things they do agree on or can come to agreement on. And so I would encourage everyone involved in this to understand that.
Senator Rubio, quickly, do you have any comment on the resignation of John Dowd from President Trump's legal team?
I don't know who that is. Who's John Dowd?
He was one of the lead attorneys on President Trump's legal team.
I don't know anything about it. I apologize.
Alex.
Back to guns. I wanted to ask Senator Rubio, do you have any plans on Saturday to participate or observe the march in any way? I know the leaders have openly disagreed with you. And secondly, if you could you talk a little bit more about the specifics of the last 5 weeks? You said you considered the magazine clips for the first time. What has that step looked like since the town hall?
Well, I'm on the Saturday, I don't know where I'm going to be on Saturday. We don't know where we're going to be yet because it's not up to us. We may be here voting. But everyone will make their own decision. I'm a legislator. I pass public policy. Instead of marching, I should be acting. I should be passing laws. And I should be getting things done in public policy. That doesn't mean you can't also do a march. I know some legislators will do that. But that's what I've been focused on. That's what I'll continue to focus on. And that's why we're here today to announce this, because when we get back, this is going to be the one thing that I think we can do next. On the magazine thing, it's a new issue to me. And I'm in the midst of all the other things going on. This is not the only issue that we've been working on as well, but in the midst of everything else that's going on, it's one that I'm trying to understand and learn more about. You know, how could it be properly regulated? What is the right number to cut it off at? Now, what is the method by which you regulate it? Who should be regulated? Is it a background checks? Is it prohibition? So, as I said, there are people that have been working on this issue for years. I've been thinking about it and considering it and learning about it for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So at some point soon, we'll be at a point where we can make some specific proposals.
Have you talked to any experts about
Well, I have, including people that own gun stores and people that sell these and try to understand better about who the typical customer is, what are the uses, what are the justifications for it. I've sought people out that are opposed to it to get their points of view. So we've tried to get a wide net of opinions to. Before I step into something that I know is going to be controversial, I want to be armed with as much information as possible so that I can make recommendations and proposals that I can defend and persuade.
Is the age limit then, by contrast, more clear-cut?
I think that's more clear-cut to understand, but I also, even as I'm willing to support that, I want everybody to understand, we just had a shooting in Maryland where the shooter was 17 years old, never bought a gun, took a gun, sounds like from his parents or something, and showed up at school. So, yes, in Parkland, if he had not been able to buy it, maybe it would have been harder. But it's fine to consider it. But in the hierarchy, and I said I would vote for it. But in the hierarchy of effectiveness, I think finding that shooter and stopping them before they step foot in the school is going to be more effective than trying to figure out what the right age limit will be. That said, I'll support it if there's an effort to do that. But that alone will not be enough.
But just to be clear, you're not intending to lead such an effort, is that?
Well, again, it could very well be part of the things we recommend coming up as part of one of the steps we're about to take. I'm just, as I told you, I've got to, we've only got so much bandwidth around here, and so we have tried to focus first on the things we can get done. If I have 5 balls in the air, you're liable to drop all 5 of them. So that's why we wanted to, at least me personally, wanted to get the step that we could get done first in the first 5 weeks. Of all the issues we've discussed, stop is the only one that could have passed before the recess. Next is the gun violence restraining order. And I've personally ranked them in what I think will be their level of effectiveness. And then at some point, the time will exist to do those other things, unless it's part of someone else's proposal before then. But that's not very hard. That one's not very hard to write. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Florida already has it.
And Alex, politically speaking, it's easier to do.
You got the mic here.
Politically, the age 21 is easier to do because it's already part of Florida law that you ban the sale of a handgun until age 21. So to add an assault rifle to that becomes politically easier because of what was already done in existing law for quite a period of time.
One quick policy follow-up. The CDC language in the Omni, for each of you, how impactful do you think that will be? Because some gun researchers and gun rights advocates have said this doesn't really change anything. This doesn't do much.
This. It was an unintended consequence of the Dickey Amendment years ago. CDC does research on all kinds of things that affect the health of Americans. They shouldn't be barred from this. So let's see what they come up with. We ought to be researching every possible affliction upon the health of Americans.
Yeah, I mean, your question says it may not have much of a contribution. I don't know. It might. We'll see.
It sure may well.
But as soon as the shooting in Parkland happened, it was one of the first things that people jumped on and said, why is this there? And a lot of us said, yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense, so we're getting rid of it. So I don't think it's now fair to say, well, since we don't think it'll do anything, since it was one of the first things people raised. No, this is an issue that's complicated. There is no one single measure that will prevent these. I think it's a combination of things, from school safety to identifying the shooters to being able to take away their guns to making it harder for people to get certain kinds of weapons. I mean, there's a scale here that you've got to go through it all. It's a very complicated issue. And we focus on schools, but by the way, we don't want to see shootings at malls, at stadiums, at the homecoming dance, any place where people congregate. So ultimately, the one thing I do know is this, and I'm sure Senator Nelson will agree, because it's absolutely true. There are people up here that disagree on how to regulate guns. I know of no one who doesn't want to stop school shootings. I know of no one who doesn't want to stop mass shootings. We should take that goodwill and use it. We should take that area of consensus and use it as the platform upon which to pursue public policies that can make a difference, especially when taken together. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.